Alright, so now we'll start part 2 of our lecture on goal setting. Okay, so something I think I mentioned in part 1 that you guys are probably pretty familiar with is this idea of SMART or SMARTS goals. And really it's just a nice acronym and way of thinking about goal setting, pretty basic way of setting up your goals and then also evaluating them. So basically what this gets at is we want goals to be specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, timely, and self-determined. So self-determined just means that it's not imposed by others and that it's more based on your own performance and not that of others. I have 3 examples here for you guys. So just kind of, we're going to walk through each one and just think about, are these good goals or could they be better? Okay, so goal 1, to not lose any conference games this year. So if we think back to our SMART goals, is that really a good goal? Well, it's not too specific. It does say not lose any conference games, so I guess that's somewhat specific. It says when, but again, not the best goal there. It is measurable because we can go by wins and losses. Is it action-oriented? Yes. I don't know the team, so it's hard to say if it's realistic or not. Is it timely? Yes, because it says this year. And then lastly, is it self-determined? Again, that's kind of a sticky one because they are coming up with it, but it is more oriented on or dependent on interactions with others. Goal 2, to increase my batting average to 400 by April 16th. Definitely time-oriented, very specific. What else do we have here? It is action-oriented. It is there is some element of others or interactions of others, but still pretty much self-determined. So here, this is a pretty good goal. Then we've got goal 3, to start a confidence log and write in it all the time. Well, that's not very specific either. It says all the time, but it'd be better if we said write in this 3 times a week or something like that. Also, there isn't really a time element. All the time doesn't really convey what the athlete would mean. Is it measurable? Again, not really. So while we might say this is realistic, it is self-determined. It's really not a very good goal. It's not hitting on many elements of the SMART goals. So what are some examples? So if we're talking about physical skills, we can think of something like tennis. So hit 4 of 6 backhands down the line, 10 volleys in a row to the deep corner, 75% of first serves in service, and then we might add a time element to this. Fitness-wise in basketball, run the length of the court in 10 seconds. So there's a different type of time element. So not how often we're going to do something, but really how long it takes us to do one task. It might be something like jumping rope continuously for 2 minutes, defensive shuffle, one length in 25 seconds. So you can see how these are pretty specific. Again, it depends on the athlete, but we would assume these are realistic, all that kind of stuff. So kind of more of what we're looking for here, more prime examples, because they get to the nitty-gritty. They give us more information, which is always better when we're setting up goals. So what else do we have here? What about some team goals? Well, we could talk about team interactions. So maybe it's just complimenting or trying to boost the confidence of our teammates throughout a practice, that kind of stuff. So we can see how these kind of goals, while at times they're kind of quirky, right, to force your team or ask your team to compliment each other, that kind of thing throughout the day or throughout a practice, it is helpful. And again, setting this up as a goal will kind of orient the team to following through. There's also like team coordination, so this is more elements of the game, so holding an opponent to under 100 yards rushing. Again, I'm assuming the time element here would be each game, so that would be weekly, that kind of thing. So it might be realistic, it might not be. There's a lot of different elements that might come in here. Okay. So how do we go about actually setting this up? If we're the sports site consultant, we're working with the team, how might we do this? Well, if we were coming in, we need to, first and foremost, we need to assess everybody's abilities. We need to figure out what the team needs, what kind of goals are realistic, that kind of stuff. We want to think about setting goals in diverse areas, so in different elements of the game. We also want to identify influences on the goal setting system. So is there a high degree of commitment from the athletes? Is there opportunity for practice? These kind of things that really, again, like it says here, really might influence how we set up our goal structure. And then lastly, planning out goal achievement strategies. So how are we actually going to achieve these goals? So there's also going to be an education and acquisition element here. So you want to set up meetings with the team or with the athlete, making them fairly frequent at first, when it might become more dispersed later on as you're feeling comfortable with the athlete following through on their goals. Then you might spread out your meetings. Initially, when you're first meeting with a team or with an athlete, you want to focus on just one goal. Okay, and the idea here is you can teach them the process about goal setting and the follow through and commitment needed for successfully attaining some long-term goal. So what about the implementation and some kind of follow-up? Well, we want to identify appropriate goal evaluation strategies. So we don't always want it to just be wins and losses, right? Like that should be an element of our goals usually. But we want to talk about, is it maybe paper-based? Is it something like statistic-based? Is it something where it's just a log and we kind of see, well, how often have you been checking in with your performance and logging that and coming back and evaluating where you're at? And as the sports site consultant, you're there to provide some support and some encouragement and maybe offer up some ideas of who else could provide support and encouragement. Now, what's important here, too, is trying to get the athlete or team to buy into this idea of goal reevaluation. Now, that can be done during, while the person is trying to achieve a goal, or it can be done during the follow-up period. So here it's really talking about looking at the progress the person has made and still thinking about that long-term goal and seeing if, is this person really on a trajectory to meet that long-term goal? Or do we need to maybe adjust where our goals are at? So you can see how we could do that maybe in season or while the person's working towards their goals, or we could do that at follow-up. So maybe they actually achieve their goals and go well beyond that. Well, at the end of the season or whenever that is, then we usually need to reevaluate our goal structure and maybe set the next stepping stone in place to see further enhancement of performance. What else? Team goals. So this is also important. We want to talk about how we work with entire groups of people. So we're interested in the future state of affairs desired by enough members of a group to work towards its achievement. So really what we're talking about here is how do we get an entire group on board and working efficiently in a specified time towards a specific goal. Now there's a lot of different ways we can do this, but there are some core principles. And usually what you want to do first is establish some long-term goals. And you want to get everybody on board, make sure everyone's aware of what the long-term goals are. Then you're going to want to talk about kind of like our mountain picture in the previous lecture. We want to talk about what are the clear paths, what are the avenues to reaching this long-term goal. And we do that with those short-term goals. Okay. You want to involve all members of the team. You don't want to just involve the captains or just the bench players, whatever it might be. You need to incorporate everyone. You want to monitor everyone's progress, reward progress. Usually you're going to leave that up to the team for them to do that. And then you also want to foster some collective confidence and efficacy concerning team goals, so the ability to actually achieve these. So a good example here is I actually worked with a college baseball team And this can be kind of tricky, right? So a men's college baseball team is comprised of around 35 people. We met early on to establish some long-term goals. I met with the coaches, the trainers, the captains, that kind of thing, to get a feel for what would be realistic and what they had in mind as goals. And baseball can be tricky, right? Each sport has its little nuances, but with baseball, you've got pitchers, you've got infield players, you've got people who are designated for certain tasks on the team. And a lot of times they'll even work out separately. We could even think about football in this matter. You might have quarterbacks, wide receivers, linemen, defense, offense, all of this stuff where people are actually working out separately from each other as a collective. Now, what was tricky with the baseball team was figuring out, what was the goal that they had in mind, and theirs was repeating as conference champions. Totally made sense. Everybody bought in, but figuring out for each person or each group of people what was most appropriate in terms of short goals into achieving that long-term goal was really tricky, and that takes some finesse. It takes a lot of planning and a lot of communication with the team, and that can be kind of tricky. But when you're able to do that, you'll see athletes begin to buy in. And what's nice is then, as a sports psych person, you don't have to sit there and keep them all accountable, because now the team, everybody on the team is aware of what the goals are, and they're gonna start to account or hold people accountable for the team's progress. Now here's a quick form for SMART goals, and again, this is working with the team, so you might have each person fill this out. What's your dream goal? What are some outcome, performance, process goals? This kind of stuff. Again, it's just a tool. It's somewhat helpful in identifying goals and making the team aware of each person's goal. There are some other ways that some people might implement goal strategies. So this is kind of an example here, but what's nice is coaches can actually do this themselves, and because this isn't the most intricate or difficult psychological skill for people to implement. But you can think of maybe a coach says, all right, each game I want you guys to come up with 3 goals. Write it down. This is kind of a gross one in soccer, but maybe you shove it down in your shin pad. If you achieve the goal, you give that gross, sweaty sheet of paper with your goals on it to the coach. Okay. Now the idea here is you're coming up with goals that are realistic, maybe attainable, specific. It's timely because it has to do with that one game, and then the coach can see these at the end and say, okay, so what was your goal? Is that realistic? Are you really pushing yourself? That kind of stuff. Again, here's another tool you might use with a team. So this is looking at really reflecting on an athlete's performance. So this is a basketball one. So it comes up with the athlete comes up with the goals that they have in mind. How much effort are they actually putting forth to achieving that goal? And then, did they actually achieve that goal? So again, it allows the athlete to kind of reflect, be a little introspective about their goal setting. So what are some problems when we're doing all of this, right? Well, it's pretty straightforward. Convincing athletes, students, exercisers, whoever it might be, to actually set goals. You'd be surprised at how difficult that is. A lot of times people aren't going to set very specific goals. They're going to try to set something that's more global and really broad, or even unrealistic and very long term. So that kind of derails the whole system before it gets started. Setting too many goals is a problem, just because your strategies tend to become overwhelming then. Recognizing that a lot of times you need to be willing to adjust your goals while you're trying to achieve them is important, because maybe you're just being unrealistic in the beginning, and being self-aware in that process is extremely important. Failure to recognize individual differences. A lot of times people are going to set goals based on other people's performance or some other person's expectations. We need to really focus in on the individual differences from person to person. Everyone's going to have different abilities coming into sport or exercise, so we need to have goals set up or tailored to that individual. And then lastly, not providing follow-up or some kind of evaluation. This is really important because if you do all of this work, you should look at the end product and say, okay, what worked well, what didn't, how can I, or what strategies can I use next time to try and achieve some goal in a more efficient way. Another element we're going to talk a little bit about, if you go to page 353 in your book, there's a nice section on hope. And hope's kind of an interesting topic because people tend to think of it a little bit different. So some people think of hope as wishing for something to happen, and in sports psych we tend to think of it a bit different. We think of it as the thinking process whereby a person actually believes that they can meet their goals, okay, or has the ability to go about achieving their goals. Now, when a person has what we might call high hope or high belief in hope, they tend to be goal-directed. They tend to be very determined and have this sense of agency. They don't always need someone holding them accountable and such. And they're really good about planning and finding the ways to meet their goals. Okay, so again, it's a different way of thinking about hope. It's not wishing that something would happen, but it's the belief that you can achieve your goals. Okay, there have been some research papers done looking at trait and state measures of hope. And again, if you don't remember what trait and state is, go back, review some of our previous lectures. Okay, but it's been found that trait and state measures of hope correlate with psychological adjustment. So things like well-being, achievement, problem solving, and health. Again, because it's not so much some wishful thinking, but it's actually believing you have the ability to meet your goals or meet some task. So what are some ways we can actually instill hope or maybe develop it? Well, they came up with this idea of the 4W goal setting system. So it's this idea of wish power, so identifying dream goals; want power, realistic short and long-term goals that lead to one's dream goal. Okay, we're seeing some parallels here back to our SMART goals. Way power, developing multiple plans and strategies for achieving our goals. So this one's really talking about the strategies. And remember, I said sometimes if you're starting at point A and your long-term goal is point B, okay, not everybody takes a straight path. Okay, sometimes we wander, sometimes we need to reevaluate and adjust the strategies that we're using to reach our goals. And then willpower is the determination and discipline required for working toward goals and overcoming obstacles that arise while achieving them. So this is an element that is somewhat tricky to develop, but again, depending on the strategies that you're using, you can really foster this idea of determination or focusing on those short-term goals as building blocks towards this long-term goal. Alright, so that's the end of part 2 for chapter 15. Make sure you go online and do our activity for this section. Thanks, guys.